Tēnā tātou katoa. Nei rā ku mihi kia koutou huitahi nei I raro I tēnei o ngā kaupapa o te reo Māori, mo te wiki o te reo Māori, tēnā rā koutou katoa. He uri ahau no Ngāti Maniapoto, me ngai tūhoi, he Pākehā hoki ahau. No reira, koenei te kaupapa o tēnei kōrero. Ake te reo Māori now and into the future. So thanks again for joining our webinar series. And there's a couple more this week as well. So ko ngā whakaaro te wā, I was just thinking about some of the things that might be going through people's minds at the moment. And, you know, ka tahi anō ka poroporo aki tia tō tātou kiingi. Ara, ko te kiingi o te kotahitanga, moi mai rā e koro. Ki tō maunga tapu o taupiri. So, you know, I was just thinking about some things that that we might be feeling, as well as the welcoming nau mai ki te ao tūroa, tō tātou kuini. So thinking about, you know, we have just received a new queen, te kuini o te rangi Māori, ngā waihono I te pō. So those were some of the things that were on my mind when I was kind of thinking about this kōrero for today. We're also in the process of change, you know, thinking about revitalisation, where we've come from, and I think this must be the 52nd year, if I can count correctly, since the petition to Parliament for te rā, you know, so we started off with Te Reo Māori Day, which then shifted into Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, which is where we're at now. We also have Mahuru Māori, so, you know, thinking about the whole month of Mahuru, which is September. And so if we're thinking about the changes that are occurring in our society regarding Te Reo Māori, we are in a space of constant resistance. So we're seeing all of this beauty coming through in Te Reo Māori use in a lot of different spaces. And, you know, we are also needing to acknowledge that we do have structures in place that are seeking to undermine mana motuhake as tangata whenua. So, you know, you would have seen if you look on the news, or if you're aware of what's happening politically, you know, we have the incoming Treaty Principles Bill. We've had a whole stream, so I've got lots of dots there about the ways in which we are needing to be constantly on high alert about what's happening in our government today. So while it's great to be celebrating Te Reo Māori, we are also very politically aware about the context in which Te Reo Māori revitalisation is happening. So some of the main points that I'll be trying to cover today, you know, I do have quite a few slides, but we don't have much time, so I'll try and get through as much as possible. So if we can understand the historical context in which we are operating in, and we're trying to revitalise Te Reo Māori in, that can help us at an individual level as well as at a collective level, at a societal level as well. Also thinking about some actionable steps that we can take towards our own Reo Māori futures, and thinking about what's required at a higher level, or that collective level again. And so I often kind of refer to Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who was a friend of my grandfather's, and Wanjuku, my grandmother. Sorry, I'm not Kenyan, just I better explain that. So yeah, anyway, so my grandfather's wife is Kenyan, and so they were friends with Ngugi. So this particular quote just reminds me of the fact that Te Reo Māori revitalisation is happening also within the global context of language annihilation, towards kind of promoting these political agendas. So language, this is the quote from Ngugi. Language carries culture, and culture carries, particularly through orature and literature, the entire body of values by which we come to perceive ourselves and our place in the world. So yeah, if we just think about that for a minute. So, you know, the domination of a people's language by the languages of the colonizing nations was crucial in the domination of the mental universe of the colonized. So thinking about language revitalisation as a political act as well. And so, we can think about this year's Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, Ake, 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 and while the Te Tairāwhiti haven't attributed this to, the new release of Ka Whawhai Tonu, we can see that the words ake, ake, ake are constantly used in political ways. So yeah, it's important that we don't our kind of desire for unity in ways that aren't actually helpful addressing some of the challenges that we're trying to deal with collectively at a societal level. So think about some of the historical trauma. There's a lot of historical trauma narratives happening at the moment. And so Hartman and Gon, they talk about these 4 kind of principles or ways of understanding historical trauma. So firstly, we have a colonial injury to Indigenous peoples. And that's that's a consequence of this idea towards conquest or subjugation. This experience is a collective experience, so a collective experience amongst Indigenous peoples. These experiences of collective injury have cumulative effects. So that means that we have, they can kind of come at a cellular level. So we have a global trickle-down effect. So even though the initial injury may have looked a particular way, the cumulative effects of that injury might look quite different. So, and then we get into this idea of intergenerational transmission. So, if we think about the idea that, the taking of political authority, land and language were tools in achieving the colonial agenda of assimilation. So if we're thinking about how we might revitalise a language, it's also really important that we acknowledge our history. And so, we have people who help us to remind us about our history. So Tame has, spent his life helping us as a society to remember some of these colonial injuries. So the I Will Not Speak Māori exhibition that he put on in 2020 for the 50th anniversary of, the petition to the Reo Māori petition. But we all have our own kōrero, we all have our own experiences of what colonisation has meant for us and how these experiences have had a trickle-down effect in our own lives. So he mihi tēnei ki ngā kaito rangapū, as well as ngā ringatoi, all of these people who are artists and help us think about solving problems in really creative ways and helping to raise our consciousness. So one of the things that, so this is our baby who is a Kohanga Reo graduate. So if we look at the Aotearoa Tēnei, the Y262 report, we see that, the government had continued to play a role in the decline of Te Reo Māori. So this little line, the scattered kind of line here, it shows the direction in which Te Reo Māori enrolments, Kohanga Reo enrolments would have taken had there been adequate funding and support for Kohanga Reo. So this idea that that grassroots movements can operate in isolation from the Crown, that's perhaps not correct, because the Crown still has the ability to impose policies and regulations and inadequately fund kind of these initiatives as well. So we do need the Crown to be on board with Te Reo Māori revitalisation. So basically our histories, we're all impacted by our histories. Whether you're Māori or Pākehā, you will be impacted by our histories in Aotearoa. So what this all comes down to for language anxiety. So what I'm interested in is how do we actually produce language? And some of the factors that help us to think about how we produce language there's both an individual level kind of series of factors that are going on, as well as the collective. But for us to know just generally, public speaking is, ranked a #1 fear. So people rank, public speaking as more anxiety provoking than the idea of dying. So, we know that there's a major anxiety that happens when people attempt to use a language that is their second language, or a language that they're not familiar with. And this is exacerbated when it's a language that you have a whakapapa connection to and you don't want to get it wrong. So understanding our triggers, both tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, we will both have different reasons for why we might be experiencing anxiety. And so once we understand our triggers, we can also start to understand the attributions that we make. So these are the stories that we tell ourselves about why we might be good or not so good at a particular task. And that's not just language learning. So if we focus on, identity as a rationale behind why we might be motivated as Māori, or, if you're a tangata tiriti, wanting to be a full citizen of Aotearoa, these are some of the motivations that we see through for why a person might want to learn Te Reo Māori. However, that raises the stakes. So if you have an identity-based investment in the language, what happens when you inevitably make mistakes in the language that you have, kind of put up on this pedestal, is that you end up feeling, quite nervous about making a mistake. And the reasons that you give yourself for making that mistake can be detrimental to your learning. So language anxiety is one of the, most well kind of researched topics in second language acquisition theory. So, we know that right from the get-go through to output, anxiety can impact on how we attain and produce Te Reo Māori. So how we learn new vocab, how we learn syntax, who we're learning that from, the encoding process from short-term to long-term memory. So anxiety can impact or disrupt that process from shifting, kupu or new vocab from the short-term to the long-term memory. It can also impact on the pace at which we can recall the information that we're trying to recall. So obviously, when you're having a conversation with somebody in Te Reo Māori, you want to be able to record the words that you are saying in as quickly as possible. Sorry. And so if you're experiencing high levels of anxiety, that can really, impact on the time that it takes to recall that information, or whether you can actually recall it at all at that particular time. So some of the ways in which fear impacts on, which whakamā can impact on Te Reo Māori acquisition and use, is based on thinking about sense of belonging. So when we feel like our sense of belonging is at risk, we start to have a fear response. This is our sense of security. Our connections might be disrupted if we feel like our sense of belonging is highly connected with an action. So the action being your ability to use Te Reo Māori. So good things for language don't really come when people are experiencing high levels of fear in those language acquisition or production phases. So one of the questions that we asked, so this is specific to Māori who are learning Te Reo Māori, we asked participants in a study, the Manawatu study, which you can find on the Māui website. If I make a mistake using Te Reo Māori, I feel like it will impact how Māori others think I am. I compare myself to other Māori speakers. I feel like I'm expected to know Te Reo Māori because I identify as Māori. So the more that participants agreed with these statements, the more that they indicated that they experienced language anxiety. So on another set of scales. So expectations are really high. So if you look at this graph here, so those in the dark blue are the high proficiency group, with those in the light blue being the low proficiency group. And so this question here, I'm expected to know Te Reo Māori because I identify as Māori. What you can see here is that those in the low proficiency group were more likely to agree with that particular statement. And so how we might interpret that result is that the expectations that Māori who are competent users of Te Reo Māori have of themselves aren't perhaps tied as closely to their identity. And in comparison, you know, we need to have aroha for those who are learners of Te Reo Māori, because the expectations that they have of themselves are really high. And so if we think about identity in the colonial context, so this is a quote from Moana Jackson, and he talks about this idea that the colonizers enthusiastically imported the idea here with definitions such as a real Māori only being someone with more than 3/4 native blood. They divided us according to this blood quantum, and if you and if in that definition you had less than 3/4, then, for example, you could not have interest in native land. By redefining us according to a scientific untruth, they effectively removed thousands of acres of land from our people, and thus began over a century of defining and redefining who we are as a people. Between 1841 and 1990, there were in fact 33 blood definitions of who a Māori is. Some said you were a Māori if you had a certain degree of Māori blood and lived as a native. Others said you could not be a Māori if you had a Māori mother and a Pākehā father, because obviously the Pākehā man's blood was quantifiably worth more than the Māori woman's blood. And so you miraculously became Pākehā. In my view, the imposition of that whole discourse is one of the most damaging things that has been done to our people, because it has altered the very notion of our identity and worth. And so here you can see the direct connection between land, the courts, our identity, and this creation of identities. And so if we go back to the results here, so those with the light blue being having lower proficiency than those with the dark blue, what we can see in this question here, if I make a mistake using te reo, I feel like it will impact on how Māori others think that I am. And so making mistakes is inevitable when we're going through language acquisition processes. And so for those that are on the low proficiency sort of end of the scale, if we assume that our mistakes are attributed to a trait that we have, this is not good. So I could say more about this, but I see I've got 1 minute left. So mea ha tātou, kia ora i ngā uri whakaheke. So what might we do to address some of these challenges? So we can identify our own advantage and disadvantages. And for those who are struggling with anxiety, we can start to help make the unconscious conscious. So what are some of our conscious beliefs that we hold about ourselves as learners or users of Te Reo Māori? And how might we reclaim our rangatiratanga over our own emotional experiences? Being very conscious about our labeling, how we label ourselves, how we label others. So these ideas of lazy or uncommitted, these can have really negative impacts on learners. And if we kind of unhinge this idea of identity from hapa, so making a mistake doesn't make you a bad Māori, it makes you a learner of Te Reo Māori. So, you know, just shifting the ways in which we kind of talk about our narratives around how we learn Te Reo Māori. So some vehicles for coping with intergenerational trauma, as well as understanding how we might learn our language as ancestral language learners. So this idea of tauha, you know, breathing exercises, finding peace in the self, somatic exercises, so mahi tinana, working through places in the body that are holding stress, finding ways to tuku, so to release these really challenging emotions. So those are all independent activities. At a collective level, we can think about, our whakapapa whānau, our kaupapa whānau, how we get our people to support us in this particular challenging time or journey. Also remembering te pūtake, what's the reason, what's the rationale behind why you've decided to enter into this journey, as well as finding a tai tuara. Sorry, these words have kind of haven't worked properly. So I won't go through all of these, but yeah, there's lots of independent coping strategies that we can work out. So identifying our personal triggers and dulling the intensity. So we can still get triggered, by particular things on and on and on, but what our goal is to try and dull the intensity of that extreme emotion. We're trying to promote engagement with Reo Māori learning activities and use activities rather than withdrawing or avoiding personal interactions where Te Reo Māori is used. So yeah, there's lots here and I won't have time. So there's lots of collective benefits to healing. So if we think about, if we think about the root cause for internal disharmony or dysregulation that can happen when we are learning Te Reo Māori, we might use our connections and our collective strength to try and address some of these things. So I'm just going to stop. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's got so much. Okay, I'll stop here. Any particular pātai? Thanks for the Akumihi nui kia koutou I rā kōrero. What a good online resources for learners. So there's lots. Depends on which level you're at. Obviously my absolute go-to is Te Aka Online, the online dictionary. And actually within the Te Aka Online dictionary, you can see there's lots of interactive activities on that. But actually just a Google search, you can have a look at, there are so many resources, which is actually kind of some of the challenge. And some people have actually done kind of like a go-to list of what those resources are. Yeah, so what are some good resources to practice sentence structure? Yeah, I mean, you can always go, it depends on who you're talking with. So the Māori at Home book is great. It gives you full sentences that you can just literally give them out. Hemi Kelly's book. So it's got like kiwaha, there's another book with kupu, and that kind of thing. So yeah, ka pai, kia ora. Okay, so many learners of Te Reo will be English speakers, both Māori and Pākehā. How do we ensure that Te Reo stays truly Te Reo and doesn't change rapidly into an English direction? So yeah, so that there has been, it's got like an acronym, it's like an NZ. Somebody on here might actually know what that study was, but Jeanette King and her colleagues have yeah, they have been doing lots of work in that area to look at language change. I think even maybe, yeah, I can't give you a straight answer without actually looking it up, but there is language change. And so I think for us, it's just working out which bits of language change are, potentially dangerous or and which bits of language change are inevitable. So, and what I mean by dangerous is, if we start to, I'm actually just going to leave that because I could go down a whole rabbit hole, but yeah, ka pai, I'll carry on. What impact do you think the workplace has on language revival? Oh, that's a great question. So I actually have a different set of slides for that, but language in the workplace, because we spend so much time in our workplaces, I'm working from home today, well, half of the day anyway, but our workplaces, they are both a source of employment, so economic security, so we kind of need a workplace or employment. And so if those places can shift from being Te Reo Māori neutral to Reo Māori positive, that's where you're going to have some really great gains. So that's thinking about the types of offerings that your employer could be making, the types of collegial relationships that encourage Te Reo Māori use, managing some of the dynamics that can be created just in the workplace generally, because you're dealing with relationships and that kind of thing. Yeah, so I'll carry on. Okay, thanks, Jacob. Jacob, thanks. Oh, Michaela, kia ora. Okay, how do you best manage language anxiety when there are pressures from your whānau? Oh, probably need to know a bit more what type of pressures there were. I think so. It would be different. Yeah, yeah. If you give me more context to that. So do you mean speakers of Te Reo Māori already, and you're not a speaker, or you want to be a speaker and then they are kind of not that supportive of Te Reo Māori? So in the second instance, if let's say you're a learner of Te Reo Māori and you really want to learn Te Reo Māori and speak Te Reo Māori, but there's some resistance, that can create language anxiety. So what that might mean is that you refer to your kaupapa whānau. So your kaupapa whānau are the whānau who you will rely on to grow that confidence and ensuring that you have that support that you need until the time that your whānau kind of comes along with you for the ride. And yeah, we can just hope that everybody gets there. So Craig, kia ora, Michaela. And Craig, given that so many learners, oh, sorry, yeah, I've answered that, I think. So this is a work question. How do you see VDubs supporting more language learners of staff apart from professional development courses? So Te Hohaiti o Te Reo Māori have some great activities for students, but I suppose part of it is the fact that we don't really have many schemes to support kind of collegial relationships. And I don't know if that can be the job of Te Kawa Māui, given that we're already kind of a very small school within a very large kind of institution. So that's a great question, maybe one that you could propose to your colleagues, of which I am one, but yeah, there are other colleagues as well. So in an odd way, it sounds as though the more people learn Te Reo Māori and become proficient, the more anxiety producing the project becomes for those who are beginners. No, that's I'm not sure if that's what I got from that. So I think that's good to hear that's how you've interpreted this data. But what I interpreted that is that we have lots of different stages that we're in the language revitalisation space. So we have people who have been raised speaking Te Reo Māori, so of course they're not going to feel anxious speaking Te Reo Māori. My kids won't feel anxious speaking Te Reo Māori because they've never experienced what it's like to not be able to speak Te Reo Māori. That's very different from my own experience. So yeah, so it's kind of the fact that we've got lots of different groupings of people who are at different stages of the revitalisation process. So that's probably the best way that I can answer that without much more context. Okay, ka pai, kia ora. Ka pai, kia ora koutou. Best way that we can help revitalise Te Reo Māori respectfully? That's great question. So if you, it depends on, again, it's going back to where does your power lie and how are you engaging in power sharing? So if you're a manager, how are you enabling your staff to excel in Te Reo Māori? What affordances are you granting your staff to engage in that space? Let's say you're not a yeah, actually, so not even in a managerial sort of situation, just as a person to person, it's kind of shouldering some of the heavy load that that relieves us as iwi Māori for dealing with some of the pressures associated with racism, colonization, and that kind of thing. So if you can sort of anticipate or see some of the dynamics that are created within particular contexts around you in interpersonal relationships or anything like that, if there are dynamics there that you can see are actually harmful or perpetuating ideas of white supremacy, then a great contribution is to kind of educate yourself about some of those issues. And actually, the Me and White Supremacy book is a really good book for any tangata tiriti who are interested in shifting their ideas about how white supremacy actually impacts on our relationships. And that book was written not in New Zealand, obviously, but there are definitely things that we can learn from that, as well as how to be anti-racist. So it's not good enough just to be not racist, because we all see that Donald Trump is not racist. Well, that's how he sees himself. So we need to sort of shift the bar. So yeah, thinking there's lots of things that can be done. So kia ora, thank you for that part-time. Yes, ka pai. Kia ora, Michaela, ngā mihi. Oh, kia ora, ngā mihi. So as an ethnomusicologist and speaker of Hawaiian, can you speak to how performances of Te Reo music can help learn the language and whakamā sometimes encountered when learning te reo? Oh, this is a great pātai. Well, thank you so much for that question. So yeah, in terms of, so there's lots of activities that we can do to release whakamā and release fear. And waiata is one of those activities. So because it can be done independently and collectively, so privately and publicly, it means that that we can be using the language kind of also at a subconscious level. So it doesn't always have to be an active learning task. But waiata as an act, a collective act, also has the ability to calm the nervous system. So waiata that's a major contributor to calming nerves and creating that kind of collective sense of oneness or belonging together. So yeah, kia ora. Wow, lots. Can't wait to have you in Aotearoa too. Kia ora. Okay, Craig, kia ora. Happy to share pātai and challenge. And so me too, Te Kawa Māui. Okay, kia ora. Definitely individual. Yes, ka pai. Kia ora, Craig. Okay. Aside from the written materials, are there any apps available Play Store? Yes, so probably so I literally have like a whole list and my mind's just gone blank. So I've this is my puka puka. You can still buy it from thick books, or not thick books, obviously. But there's a whole list here of things that you can do to improve different aspects of your learning. And somebody asked about sentence structures, breaking them up is sometimes an easy way to do that. So yeah, there's lots of podcasts. So Everyday Māori, if you're sort of a new learner of Te Reo Māori, Taringa is a really great podcast for kind of those that are shifting into Reo Rua spaces who can kind of follow a conversation along. Geez, I need my phone. But yeah, the apps, the Te Hiku, if you follow Te Hiku, they have an app which is like all of the Reo Aiwi, like the Reo Irirangi, Reo Aiwi, that's in one place. So there's lots of things to try. So maybe it's just to try and see which works for you. So ka pai. Kia ora, Shay. Which way of learning to deal is most impactful? So everything, so it's about trying to work out your so if like one of the things that I suggest is that people kind of audit their language input and output. So how much input so you need a lot of input in order to produce te reo, with any language, right? So input is can be visual or it can be auditory, so as well as, like the emotions, feeling the language and all that kind of thing. But so a good idea is to set a task of what you're reading. Be conscious of what you're reading. How intentional are you in that reading process? Is this like an active learning thing, or is it just kind of flippant? I'm just looking at things that happen to be around me. So what you're trying to do is create small incremental steps of input. So if you're reading, then that's going to help you to familiarize yourselves with what a word looks like, compared with what a word sounds like. So you're going to need that combination of both of those things. And there are some great, there's some great resources that are out there. So this was that's just my book, hard sell there. And that's the other one that I had, the Māori at Home one, just sitting there. Okay, so looks like we don't have any more pātai. But as I said, I'll just share. So you can find me at these places. If it's a work kind of related question, definitely email me. If it's kind of just I put lots of resources of my own thinking kind of onto Instagram mainly, and I actually have kind of stopped using Twitter a little bit, or X. But anyway, those are where you can find me. Okay, ka pai. Great to have you all. Thanks again for coming, and look forward to meeting you in person. Okay, ngā mihi nui, ka kite.